that you're looking at as an icebreaker or an opening, do you have any idea what you're looking at? What do you think you've been looking at for the last couple of minutes? What is it?
That's an airport.
Yes, that is an airport, but isn't there anything weird about this airport? No passengers, right? This is right now. This is the second largest airport in the world. When it was built, it was the largest airport in the world. It was supposed to be the project of 21st century, launched by Peter Trudeau, surprisingly in Canada. This airport is called Mirabel Airport. It's in Montreal. And right now, it's in this shape. So everything in place, everything in good shape, but there is no passenger. A few years ago, they decided to close it down. Then they decided to dismantle the whole airport. Right now, I think they recently decided to make other uses out of it, like turning it to a community center or something like that. Why? I basically selected that opening to talk about the complexity of mega projects. Well, basically, mega projects are super complex phenomena because, first of all, they are super interdependent to each other. One of the reasons why it became a failure was lack of having enough transportation systems to get people from Montreal, from Quebec City, to Mirabel. Lack of that connectivity made it a failure. There's a lot more than that. I don't want to waste time on why super infrastructure projects are complex. But one other important thing that I watched in those videos was the fact that you build the things to the best that you can do. You make great decisions, you bring the high-end technology and everything, but at the end, what dictates whether or not your project is a success is your customer. So if you build the best thing ever and nobody uses it, that has been a failure. These days, projects, complex mega projects, have used these forms of networks of decision makers. So decision maker is not a single soul, is not a hierarchy of people. It's basically a mesh of people connected to each other who have vested interest in the project. They can be owner, general contractor, project manager, financier, and other people who have stakes in the project and who have power to make what they want happen. Project networks have normally a node in the middle, which can be the project, can be the owner, and everybody is connected to that center that is called ego in the language of social networks. And also, looking at such a graph can add insight to the process of decision making to understand the stakeholder. As an example, right now what you're looking at, size of nodes shows the level of importance, level of influence of people who are following the project or have influence on the project. People normally get together and form clusters. They are organic clusters formed in the project, and they are called communities. Understanding what those communities are, what they are formed around what interests those communities are formed, is another piece of insight that we can get in these projects. We can find strategic points like pivots, points which are at intersection of multiple communities, because they do have access to brand new information from different disciplines. They are important sources in our project, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot to be understood out of studying these project networks, which deeply depends on how we define the nodes and how we define the links between them. Nodes are clear. Basically, anybody who has interest in a project can be a node, and the links can be defined at several different layers. Depending on what type of relationship you're defining, you're solving a different problem. The one that we were interested in, as I briefly mentioned before the presentation, was the flow of decision making among people who have stakes in a project. So we focused on exchange of information. So each link in our network is one instant of information exchange. And the problem that we wanted to solve was understanding the knowledge from the source of that knowledge, the context-sensitive knowledge in these complex projects, which are not which are not collected in one place. They are normally distributed among a variety of nodes, and we were trying to distill this knowledge which is distributed among the project networks. So these project networks, to be understood, have to be approached from two aspects. First of all, we need to understand the connectivity among the people, which is related to the social network analysis. And second, we need to understand what is exchange, what is the content of information exchange among people, which requires semantic analytics. When we began, we started with a comprehensive list of 100 infrastructure projects. Back then in 2010, this list was out, which was the 100 strategic infrastructure projects in North America. We started with that list, and we shortlisted that. We wanted to study these project networks in mega projects. And we shortlisted that into 23 projects in North America. The way that we narrowed it down, I wanted to skip it, but as we were talking about the scoping, we first of all wanted to cover as many sectors and subsectors of infrastructure as possible. We had an emphasis on transportation, so we tried our best to cover all as many subsectors of transportation as possible, from light rail transit to heavy rail transit or subway system, the metro system, to tunneling, bridges, highways. And on the other side, we didn't want to ignore non-transportation, so we looked at oil and gas and energy when I began. Also buildings was part of that, but another thing that narrowed us down was access to data. Which of these projects have good sources of data? Many other things made us shortcut our list from 100 into 23. And as I will show you down the road, even 23 was a lot. So we had to monitor all the 23 and narrow it even down deeper into a few projects that we studied in depth. They are listed right here, the LRT projects. So that was the beginning point, looking at these projects and trying to understand the project networks as I showed to you a few slides earlier. One important thing that we explored was the fact that the modern decision networks, the modern project networks, are not limited to official or technical decision makers. There's not a closed club of people who provide fund or people who provide knowledge who have the say in the projects. There are many cases that we came across in which decisions were either reversed, changed, or even there was failure in the whole project because of what community wanted. So the social communities, the normal users of projects, the end users of projects, these days have a say. And that was the final nail to the coffin that said, okay, enough is enough. Let's focus on these folks. Let's focus on understanding communities, how they get involved, what do they want, what they want changes over time. And does such a thing even exist? It was a little bit risky because we could have continued and at the end of the day see, no, these people just come together whenever a major thing happens. They try their best to impose whatever they want. If it happens, happens. Otherwise, they just go away until the next bottleneck or the next gateway. So what we decided that we want to go with it because there was enough number of cases and there was other domains. From other domains we could see that how strong the social communities are and how important what they want is in other domains. So we decided that we want to open the doors to end users of the facility to become part of that decision network, that project network that I showed you at the beginning. One major problem which popped was the scalability, because when you go from 100 nodes into 1 million nodes, we never went to 1 million, but we went to a couple of thousands of nodes, things are not scalable. We are dealing with big data, the word that I hate these days. Big data is overused, and many people argue that it doesn't even exist, but it does exist, unfortunately. Methods applicable to data do not necessarily apply to big data, and methods like analysis methods are different. But the good point is, the good side is, you can detect patterns from big data, which are meaningless if you do the same thing in not quite big data. So we decided that there are good things popping out of big analysis of big data. However, we definitely need new methods of analysis. what do we need in a nutshell? You can see in this slide. We basically wanted to know who is saying what. So the first thing was we needed to understand what people are talking about. We needed to detect the subject of discussions in the society about an infrastructure project. Second, we needed to know whether or not they're feeling well about this new project from different aspects. So we needed to detect the sentiment of discussions. And at the end of the day, we didn't want to listen to everybody. We wanted to listen to people whose says matter. So how important a piece of information or a piece of discussion popping out is with respect to specific information. And we decided, at the very beginning, we decided that we do not want to sit and judge who is important and who is not. We wanted to go for self-organizing systems. The important person is the one that society decides is important, the person who has more influence in that network that I showed to you. So the answer to these three questions were where we began. So a second shot to the same project network. When it comes to infrastructure discussion network, that was the term that we coined back in 2012. We called these networks IDNs, or infrastructure discussion networks, and they have two sides. This coin has two sides. On the left side, we do have that social network that I introduced to you in the beginning, those pieces of insight that can come out of it. But on the other side, there's discussions. There are the pieces of discussions coming out of the people. We needed to understand what is the subject of those discussions, which leads us to the interest among the stakeholders of the project, and what is the sentiment of those discussions, which leads us to the position of people with respect to that aspects. In this example, I'm just selecting three pieces of tweets about the project in British Columbia. One of them is talking about social aspect of the project, the other one economy, the third one environmental. We had to narrow down our scope because there is no way to detect all subjects automatically. We narrowed the context that we were interested in into sustainability. So we need to detect of which of these three aspects of sustainability a new tweet is concerned, and on the other side, is it supportive of the project or against it? So is the sentiment positive or negative? And then connecting these two sides was the innovation that we wanted to add into the whole picture. Connecting what people say into the people who are saying those things was meant to add insight and show us what the community is thinking about the project and how that can influence the decisions with respect to the project. I'm showing the whole research in one slide here. So the research questions that we began with were these three. Who are the project followers or project stakeholders? How influential each of the stakeholders is? Which topics do they discuss, and what is the sentiment of those discussions? These three questions are directly translated from the literature of stakeholder management in infrastructure. This is the answer to these three questions gives rise to stakeholder mapping, as it is called in infrastructure. So if you want to build a new infrastructure project, these are the three questions that you have to answer about every single soul who has a stake in your project. And on the other side, we didn't want to stick into one snapshot. We wanted to see how these things change over time and look at the dynamics of such questions. We needed a few components to answer these questions. In order to understand who our followers are, we looked at community detection and also, so we needed to detect those sub-communities in the whole network of communities and profile them, understand what these communities are about. In order to understand how influential they are, we needed to have systems and methods to analyze their influence level in those networks. What are they talking about and what is the sentiment? We needed topic and sentiment classification methods to automatically or semi-automatically detect these two aspects. And finally, we needed to quantify and combine them and look at these quantified analytics over time to see the dynamism in these networks. The methodology to develop these components, I will get back to this part and I'll explain every single box that you see here. So for now, I just move on. And at the end, we came across a few results and outputs. Some of them are are more important contributions or more original contributions, and some of them less. So I will explain these to align my presentation. So to wrap it up so far, the gap that we at the end of the scoping, we decided that we want to approach was, first of all, we decided that social media is not used at its best in our domain. Why social media? Because we wanted to learn about the community. One of the best places that the community has its voice in is social media and social networks. So we decided to see how we can take a better advantage of the social media and social network. And in order to make sure that it does make sense, look at the rest of the bullet points. First of all, so far there was too much emphasis on what is discussed, and the previous studies had ignored who the people behind these discussions are. Is this a real pain in the domain? Is this a good question to answer? Am I answering a right question? The last two coming out of the results of studies. Here is the major study that existed back then, run in Texas, studying many tweets about transportation systems. And the study showed that the official decision makers are interested in more meaningful information coming out of the social network. And also in the industry, the current practices was, we do care about what's happening in social media. However, we do not have enough skill set. What you see here is one of the best cases in Boston. This lady, senior manager in public relation department for the Boston Transportation Department, sitting down there, getting paid to read every single tweet with hashtag Boston Transit Department or mentioning that. So that's basically, and it's not 1992. It's basically back in 2014, I think, or 14 or 15. 2015, actually. It's 2015. So we took it from there, having the objectives in mind, just quickly going through them. What is the behavior of these IDNs? Do they exist? I skipped that because the earliest stages of the work we could prove that these networks do exist. So they do exist. What is their behavior? What algorithms should I use? Because if you go to other domains and you want to borrow algorithms from there, you will get overwhelmed. There are tons and tons and tons of algorithms to answer a single question. Which of these is the best algorithm to use? That needs a performance measure. So developing those performance measures and going to other domains, stealing algorithms from there, testing them against those performance measures and saying this is the algorithm which is most applicable to my domain was another objective. And once we have those algorithms, understanding the stakeholder mapping, which was understanding typology of stakeholders, who are they, their influence level, their interests, and their positions were the main objectives of this study. Here's the methodology in one slide. We started with benchmarking algorithms from other domains. So we looked at algorithms for to answer these two major questions: community detections, who are the clusters in the network of followers of my project, and influence analysis. As I'll show you in the next slide, there are tons of these algorithms. So detecting those algorithms and defining performance measures. Who says this algorithm is better than that algorithm? We need a few criteria and performance measures. To define those, we looked at two things: algorithmic performance, which one is faster, which one is more accurate, which is not our job, that's the job for computer science and mathematics, and the relevance. The result of which of these algorithms is more relevant to our context. Once we decide on those, we focus on social network analysis first, and then on the semantic analysis. We try to profile our users and label them. So give me the network, I automatically analyze that and say and get back to you and say these are the main interests in your project. These are the people who are grouped together around each of those interests. It needs two things. I need to understand connectivity and say these are people who are densely connected to each other. And second is to profile them, to understand their interests. Comes out of their profiles, comes out of the interest that they share online, and so on and so forth. From there, we needed to come up with methods to, as I said, automate them. in order to automate, we looked at lexical analysis and semantic analysis. And at the end, we decided to, for the sake of my research, my PhD research, we decided to use human coding as well, not only to validate, but also to make sure that we have reliable results. When it comes to the lexical analysis, but again, let me highlight what I'm talking about here. We have a bunch of texts coming out of each of those groups. We want to make some sense out of it. The first level is lexical analysis. Break each text into its terms, try to do statistical analysis on those terms, occurrence of those terms in different groups of documents, and try to make some sense out of it. We use TF-IDF as a measure. That's one of the most basic measures, but we managed to introduce a new measure called modified TF-IDF, which term frequency, inverse document frequency. I'm more than happy to talk about those things after the presentation, but for now I don't go into the detail of analysis. But basically just keep in mind that here we're just doing a statistical analysis, pure statistical analysis on terms occurring in different documents. Then we took it into semantic analysis. I'm not only interested in what are the terms, but also what are the subjects discussed by people. And to answer this question, there are many semantic transformation methods. I'll show that in a separate slide. But basically, latent semantic indexing combined with k-means clustering. I'm just trying to use the fanciest words here, but I'm not going into the depth of any of these unless somebody asks me. And at the end of the day, the human coding to understand what these topics are about. From there, we needed to combine the results and somehow to connect that connectivity that I talked about, connect the subjects to the people who are behind them. Combine them and come up with a profile, give it to the decision maker and say, this is what community thinks about your project, and this is its dynamics. The product, we called it Project Discussion Profile. We're super interested in abbreviations, you can say from I2C. So we called it PDP, Project Discussion Profiles. And at the end, we needed to, as any research work needs, we needed to verify and validate to make sure that we answered the right question and we answered it right. In order to do that, to test and validate our work, we looked at parallel resources. I took it as a default that you all know that my work was focused on social networks, social media. But basically, if you do not know, if it's a news, I work on social media. There are other resources which archive what people think, including the news, including the public meetings run for each project, which aim to bring the end users in and survey them and understand what they're thinking about the project. So we tested our findings versus findings out of these resources. Here I showed just a quick summary of the contributions of my work. Just read the first one, perhaps most comprehensive study in SMA. We looked at, as I said, 23 projects. We studied 4 of them in the most level of depth possible, and we monitored 19 other projects. We collected data for over 2 years over these projects, and we studied the data collected. We combined both social network analysis and semantics. Each of these bullet points is unique to this study and had never occurred before. And the comparison versus other resources were what making this study unique. Also, the modified TF-IDF that we suggested at the end is a unique contribution of the work, and the framework that we are providing that says, here is the framework. Just plug your social media into it, and the outcome will be the PDP, as I mentioned in the previous slide. I'm going to quickly walk you through each of the stages of the methodology and tell you what it is about. Whenever you feel I'm overtime or you feel sleepy, let me know and I stop. So the beginning point was, what are the right algorithms to select? We went to the literature. For each of the 3 questions that we had, there were tons of classes of algorithms. When I go into each of these classes, I find 100 algorithms. So the question was, which one is the best? Starting with the community detection, we had our criteria, the criteria that we decided on, the algorithmic performance and the relevance. So based on the relevance and algorithmic performance, we looked at different algorithms, and at the first shot we decided that modularity maximization is the best algorithm to be used. It was no surprise because in other domains they believe in the same belief. But then there are tons of modularity maximization algorithms. Which one is the algorithm? This is the time to look at the relevance of the outputs. So let me give you an example. I have 4 groups following my project. I want to know, I want to detect those 4 groups from the social graph of followers of a project. I apply different algorithms. Each algorithm gives me a different set of 4 groups. Which one is the best one? It's time to look at the semantics, look at those 4, look at the profile of them, and answer this question: which of these 4 is giving me the most uniform, meaningful, unique, relevant set of sub-communities? That's when we looked at the semantic, and semantic helped us to decide which of the modularity maximization algorithms is the algorithm to use, which was the fast unfolding in our case. And again, just keep in mind, it didn't happen in 1 project, it happened in 23 projects. So that we can say, yeah, that we are confident that this is the best one. Maybe one of you wants to investigate, if is jobless, wants to investigate on why mathematically this can be related back into the relevance. The next step was influence. There are tons of measures for influence. The popular one in our domain was degree centrality, which happens to be the easiest one, the most straightforward one. Our studies showed that PageRank, the algorithm used by Google, is a lot more meaningful, a lot more relevant, results in a lot more relevant outcomes, because it not only looks at who has the highest number of followers, but it also looks at the quality of followers. I might have 5 followers who are Justin Trudeau, Kathleen Wynne, and Rob Ford, and Tamara Rabi. So somebody else might have 100 followers who are nobodies who are following. So looking at the quality lies in this algorithm, and that's why it results in more meaningful. So the first set of findings was, what is the best algorithm when it comes to answering each of the 3 questions? Now that we have good algorithms in hand, let's go and study our networks and see what insights comes out of it. Starting with the social network analysis. So looking at our network, our projects as social networks, and understanding the connectivity. The example that I'm presenting here is Crosstown Toronto, the LRT project running in the Eglinton. Most of you are familiar with this project. Rodrigo, you are familiar because we're dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. So we focused on the Twitter page of this project starting back in September 2012, when even Harry was not around. And we studied that project for over 2 years. When we analyzed the input, it was after 16 months. So we looked at the followers. We collected all the followers on a regular basis and formed this network over time. And also we collected the tweets and analyzed the content of the tweets on a day, not daily, on a monthly or bi-monthly basis. So basically the questions that we answered here was, what is the fundamental properties, what is the fundamental behavior of these networks? Are they mimicking the behavior of other social networks like Facebook and LinkedIn and so on and so forth? The second question was, what are the communities, and what are they about? So these communities here, each of the communities is colored in a different color. What are they about? And then, so these 3 are answering those 3 questions. And who are the community leaders? Who are the important people in each of these communities? If I want to influence this community, whom should I approach? Whom should I convince? Whom should I pay to convince them? Hopefully not paying them, but basically whom should I convince? Whose point of view should I reflect back into my design to make sure that this community is happy with the design? Here, just comparing 4 different projects in 4 major North American cities. They're all LRT projects. They're all running in cities with more or less similar let's say, attributes. No 2 cities in the world are similar. Every single project is context sensitive, but basically more or less, like they all have LRT in their history. All projects are in planning to construction phase. So these types of things made us go with these 4 projects in Detroit, Atlanta, Toronto, and Minnesota. And we studied their fundamental behavior. These things that you see here, including density, clustering, degree, and diameter. And also here, basically, the most naive ones, how many followers and how many edges exist in these networks. But these aside, this is what social network analysis 101 talks about. These things are the main characteristics of a network, of a social network. So we studied them. We studied them versus the well-known social networks like Facebook and LinkedIn, as I mentioned. And our main aim was, how do these networks form and how do they develop and evolve over time? We decided on these networks not only because they are about projects which are similar, but also because these projects were in different phases of their life cycle, from planning to early construction and construction. And as you see, they are compared. We do get a trend in many of these criteria. For some of them, not quite a trend, but still, even here, it gives us some insight that how do these networks behave in terms of clustering. Again, I avoid going into the depth of meaning of these things. We'll be happy to answer any question in the Q&A part. But basically, what I want to emphasize is, see, there is a trend. There is quite a trend. There is quite a trend. It means that it might be worth it to focus on every single project and study it over time, because these are might be comparing apples and oranges. I'm comparing 2 different projects. What happens when I look at one project? I did look at one project, and many of these things were verified in analyzing the project. So 2 things can be detected here. First of all, there is this is the Toronto project, and over time, 16 months. And here is how each of those parameters changes over time. I want you not only to look at the trends, but also look at the gateways, the decision gateways in the project, and see how sometimes we have fluctuations or we have abrupt changes. Those abrupt changes are super meaningful. Around each major decision, the layout of the social network changes. There's a reason why behind that. We also detected the communities in each of these projects, and we also used the text analysis to make sense out of these communities. Another instance of example from the Crosstown project, 4 communities. We used the profile. So let's say we used the social network analysis, we used the community detection algorithm that I just explained. We came up with these 4 communities. They are just nodes, nothing but nodes. What we did in the next step was we collected the profile description of all nodes in here and formed one document. All nodes here, the second document, third and fourth. I have 4 documents collecting the affiliation of people belonging to each of these communities. And now is the answering the question of, can I detect a topic for each of these documents? And thankfully, topic detection is a very well established area in AI. We did the same thing with the most recent tweets coming out of people here, 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 and here. So we tried to automate not only detecting these communities, but also interpreting these communities. And the result was, each of the 4 communities is related to one of these 4 main interests. City policymakers, city councilors, and their close followers. The ultimate operator, which is TTC, and the close followers of TTC. The community of technical decision makers, the owner, the GC, many consultants involved in the project were here, and also the community of public. So the 4 sub-communities existing in this community were interpreted this way. It doesn't mean that when it comes to community C1, it's only technical decision makers, but it means that the most influential ones were the technical decision makers. That's why the keywords related to the technical aspects always pop, and they are magnified. I explained TF-IDF, and I said we defined a modified TF-IDF, which basically scales up a term if it's related to a person who has higher level of influence. So it's not only a text analysis, it's not only semantic, it's socio-semantic. It has the semantic aspect and also the social aspect. I think you're confused enough, so I can continue. If there are questions, I'm happy to get them. To give you some sense of semantic analysis, I walk you through the semantic analytics that we looked at. We needed to detect and mind opinions discussed with respect to our project. An opinion, we broke it down into a dyad of subject and sentiment, as I showed in the very first slide. We selected a scope for the subject, which was sustainability. And for sentiment, we were interested in supportive versus opposing the project. We aimed to come up with classifiers, which automatically classify a tweet. Once it receives a tweet, it says, this is talking about the economy of this project, and the person behind this tweet is against the project. So I need two classifiers, economy and against, subject and sentiment, which never happened in my PhD. Later on, our collaboration with Moeen resulted in those classifiers. Moeen has recently developed the sentiment classifier as well. So we do have those classifiers. They are not terribly accurate. The accuracy that we get is around 90%-ish for subject and 80-something-ish for the sentiment. Am I right? But basically, they do exist here. And right now, back then, they did not exist, and I had already enough on my plate. So we decided that let's ask people to classify these tweets for us. Basically, when we made such a decision, we decided that any classifier needs a training set. So we decided to use people. We decided to outsource the classification of these tweets but basically, when you want to train a classifier, you need a set which is already classified, and you train your classifier over that. In most of the cases, the researcher sits down and classifies the set and says, this is the base, let's train the classifier. What we decided was we do not want, because sustainability is already a subjective issue, being against or for a project is a subjective issue, and we didn't want more bias in the classification phase. So we decided that let's crowdsource it. We designed a game called Sustainability. We ran the game for 2 months. We asked people to come and classify the set of tweets that we had collected for almost a year from the aspect of subject and sentiment. We created incentives for people to invite other people. Each tweet got classified several times. If we detected that a tweet is classified by different people in different classes, we added to the rounds of classification so that we understand at the end of the day which one is the, I don't want to say right answer, but more probable answer, basically. And this study had many byproducts. A taxonomy basically came out of this study. We, for the first time, I think, or at least that's what both of the strict reviewers of the paper believed, for the first time we could show what we mean when we say this is subjective. Because basically you have a bunch of tweets classified 3 times by 3 different people. They all believe that it's talking about the economy. And a bunch of tweets, on the other hand, classified by 10 people. 3 of them believe it's economy, 2 of them believe it's social, the rest of them believe it's irrelevant. The second one is a subjective issue. So looking at those types of tweets and understanding why, what makes sustainability a context-sensitive, a subjective issue, it was another byproduct. But basically, at the end of the day, what we had in hand was a set of classified tweets. Combine them with the network value, the level of influence of people who are behind these tweets, gave rise to the PDP, as I explained at the beginning. So this is the project discussion profile for Crosstown project. Ignore this part. This just shows how trend of number of tweets was over the project life cycle. But basically what I want to emphasize is here. Each of the colors is referring back to one of the 3 major pillars of sustainability. As you see, there is a 4th category called engineering and technical. This came out of the crowdsourcing study. Our users convinced us that if you want to have a complete set of sustainability pillars, it's not only 3, there's a 4th dimension called engineering. And surprisingly enough, when we get back into the early studies in sustainability, one major one run by Chris Kennedy, it had 4 classes, and engineering was there. Later on, for any reason, people decided that let's remove it. But right now, many topics which are classified under social are not really social, they're technical. They can be classified under engineering. Anyways, we decided to go with these 4 major subjects. Each line is showing trend of social belief with respect to that subject. If it's in the lower half, it's had negative sentiment, which means people are not happy with it. If it's in the top half, it means that the summation, the resultant of the sentiments over that month has been positive. So let's follow social, for example. People are happy, they're neutral, happy, unhappy, getting happy, happiest, not quite happy, a little bit unhappy, super happy, so on and so forth. This is oscillating. What is this oscillation about? In most cases, it's related back into major decisions made for the project. When we focused on the minimum and maximum of happiness in social aspect, we surprisingly found that it's related to 2 related revisions of EA, environmental assessment for this project. And I'll show it to you in more details in the next slide. We also looked at the community-based analysis, what each community thinks over time. Focusing on so basically, let's say so far I have this hippie analysis of what people think. What can I do with it as a decision maker? Why are you adding value? I'm just giving an example of why we're adding value, and this example also covers how we validated our study. It's 1 p.m. Should I continue or?
Anybody in this class or something?
I'm going to use your time.
Okay.
So you have my 30 minutes.
30? No, I just take 10. I appreciate 10. All right, so when we focus on the minimum and maximum, as I said, they happen to be right next to the 2 revisions of the environmental assessment. The first revision was removing 2 major stations out of this line. And the second one was returning them back into the plan. So if you look at the plan at the beginning, well, right after the first decision in December 2012, they decided that this project is running underground in major parts. It was supposed to go underground until up to here, but then they decided that beyond LERT, they want to continue underground because of the economy, because of many technical issues like contamination that they found in the soil. They couldn't come on top here because of that. And because of the slopes and the profile of the ground, they decided that it's all in all better to continue underground and remove these 2 stations because it costs a lot to have underground stations. When in the initial plan, Leslie and Farron, these 2, were above ground stops. How much? Like a couple $1,000. For a couple $1,000, you can have an above ground platform. But underground station is not even comparable. So they said, why not remove these 2? They get back into the studies, the demand studies, and they said, yeah, they most probably have poor ridership in these areas. Let's remove these 2, get rid of these 2. Let's stick into dumb mills. From LERT, the next stop is dumb mills. And from here, we go above ground. They announce the decision. Later on in May 2013, they had to reverse the decision. So come above ground after LERT and grant back these 2 stops. Against all those technical analysis, all those economic analysis, and surprisingly it was simply because people did not welcome this decision. People complained a lot about, no, we do need these 2 stops. It's reflected back in the analysis of tweets. It's reflected back in analysis of news media and also in analysis of public meetings. So we said, why not taking it and use it as a comparison between these 3 resources? So we looked at different pieces of news discussing these two decisions. We looked at the content of public meetings, and we studied them versus the tweets, which were discussing this very decision before and after the reversing decision. So I call this phase before reversing the decision, and this phase after reversing the decision. Okay, we looked at all tweets which were talking about Leslie and Farron. So we wanted to see how these three resources are different from each other. Which one, and what type of analysis method can reflect what is happening here when it comes to tweets the best? In order to answer that, we needed semantic analysis. So here I explain how the semantic analysis was happening in our study. Basically, the data that you collect, whether it's coming from the public meeting, from the tweets, news media, as long as you have text, it's the corpus. And the corpus is chaotic. It's basically a bunch of words and nothing more than words. It can come from any resource. It requires a pre-processing. You need to clean up some of non-meaningful or non-value adding text, like is, am, are, most probably doesn't add much value. But even after cleaning, what you have is a chaotic corpus. From there, we need to do a transfer. We need to transfer from this chaotic vector space, if you like, into a more or better structured vector space, which is a space of the lexical analysis. The lexical space is more ordered. It's basically a vector space in which each dimension is one term. So look at all the terms happening in your corpus, take each term as one dimension, look at each document, and you can look at different things, like how many times this term has happened in this document, or how many times comparatively, how many times has it occurred? Like number of occurrence for this term over the total number of words. TF-IDF, many different measures. But the good thing is you can model each document as a vector in this space. But it's not enough, because it's still words. We needed subjects. Latent semantic indexing can transform from this space into semantic space, which is not only ordered but also meaningful. Each dimension in this space is a subject. So you can imagine how lower the number of dimensions are here compared to here. So here we're talking about hundreds of, maybe most probably thousands of words, or tens of thousands of words. Here we're talking about dozens of subjects. So each text now is a vector in this space. It's basically a distribution over the topics that you're interested in. I have collected a bunch of tweets, and I can show them as a distribution over these subjects. I can show you before and after the decision was reversed, how this distribution has changed. So you turn any set of text into a distribution over those topics that you're interested in. And that enables you to compare them. If you want to know whether tweets are closer to news or public meetings, it's basically the matter of comparing these two distributions, or these two distributions, or any other distributions. Comparing distributions can happen through a simple chi-square analysis. So we use that to see whether the TF-IDF is a better reflector or the modified TF-IDF. And in most cases, as you see, the answer was modified TF-IDF. We also answer other questions. How good tweets is as a source of collecting social opinion when we compare it versus news and other resources, basically. How well a public meeting was run. How can I answer that? Just collect the whole content of discussions over that meeting, compare it versus what is discussed online or what is discussed in news. See if what you discussed in your public meeting is a good reflective of what people believe. So the third group of findings was about this last part of validation and verification. So basically, back to where we began. That's the way we scoped our research. The methodology we took to give rise to those components and the results coming out of this study. if I want to explain the contributions in a more specific way, first set of contribution was about the algorithms. We looked at tons of algorithms and we systematically decided that these are the best algorithms when they are applied to our domain. We studied the behavior of IDNs as social networks by combining the SNA with semantic analysis. And also we offered a framework which is recyclable. You can use it in your new projects. You can recycle it. And it connects the topics and opinions to the people. It's not only look at one of the two. All systems existing before us were either here in our field or here outside our field. Thank you so much.